Hello and welcome to Horror Cult Trash Over, the show that discusses all the masterpieces and trash to pieces of genre cinema. My name's Chris,
And I'm Gary.
and this week we are discussing a film that I've wanted to discuss for a very long time. I've watched it endless amounts of times over the years. Fantastic director, fantastic film. It's George A. Romero's Martin.
It is. From 1970,
Martin.
from 1976 or 77.
Depending
Depends
on what website. I don't know how that works, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, our podcast listeners will know from previous episodes that we've discussed Romero previously, Dawn of the Dead, The Crazies, but of course he's known for Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Creep Show, Night Riders, Monkey Shines, and so many more. Written and directed by him. One of his personal favourites of his films.
Yeah, and understandably as well. I think it's been a bit of a cult classic. I think the problem was it's sandwiched in between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. So it's kind of, in my opinion, I felt like it was kind of forgotten. And when I watched it, I bought a DVD one time because I loved Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead so much. And I bought it and watched it so many times over the years, but I think it's been a bit lost.
Oh, it definitely has. Yeah. No, it absolutely deserves to be discussed a lot more when it comes to Romero, because I truly believe he's got 4 or 5-star films, and of course 3 of them are the original trilogy of the Dead. But I think the 4th one's this one. I really think this deserves to be recognised just as much as those 3.
I think so, definitely. Spoiler alert for the ratings at the end. But yeah, no, I completely agree. It's one of those films, and there's a fair few of them from, particularly the 70s, I feel, that make me question why we believe elevated horror is a modern concept. I'm thinking stuff like Don't Look Now, that's a slow burn, but it's nuanced and it's layered and it has impeccable, acting and direction and says something, which George A. Romero was very famous for, his social commentaries, and it's certainly not lacking in Martin. But I do wonder why it's such a modern concept.
Oh my god, do you know what?
Horror.
You saying that, now, every now and then we struggle a bit with, if you've seen this, we recommend checking out, and I'm not going to change what either of us have said for the end of it, unless you've said this without me knowing. But what you've just said made me think immediately of Bones and All.
Yeah.
Bones and All is very much like a modern day Martin.
Yeah. That's true.
And honestly, I know we cast him in a lot of remakes, but if Martin was to be remade, Timothée Chalamet would absolutely.
Oh, 100%.
It'd be A24. Or it might not be. It might be just Luca Guadagnino and Timothée Chalamet, because this is very much, I believe Martin was a big influence on Bones and All. I mean, it's based on a novel, isn't it?
What, it's Bones and All?
Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me if, I don't know when the novel was written, but I think there must have been some influence in there, because it's very much, similar.
I think we've got to the point where Martin is more well known and readily available.
Yeah, it's definitely got a cult following.
Yeah,
that's for certain. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those, when you think Romero, immediately you think Trilogy of the Dead,
of course,
or maybe Creep Show. But yeah, no, he's got so many great films, and he really is, I would say, probably the most underrated horror director, because again, you think of those films, but you don't think of his other ones, such as like The Dark Half, Monkey Shines, and even something like Night Riders. And I'm sure I say this every time we discuss Romero. We may have to do Night Riders eventually, but Night Riders is really a hidden gem that needs to be seen.
Yeah,
but he's just such a fantastic director. He really is.
Yeah, there's some lows there.
Like 2?
Yeah.
2 lows out of all those films. We haven't seen Survival of the Dead, but out of everything I've seen, there's only been 2 bad films.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Are we in
Um,
agreement? There's always vanilla
there's always Vanilla and Bruiser.
and
Yeah.
bruiser.
Bit of backstory to Martin. According to producer Richard P. Rubenstein, by the time both he and Romero got together to make the film, Romero was under a serious debt, almost $1 million, after the back-to-back failures of the films he had done after Night of the Living Dead.
Mm.
Rubenstein told Romero it was alright to declare bankruptcy and start over again. However, Romero refused because he felt it was inappropriate to back out on the people who had helped invest in his films. So Rubenstein, having a lot of respect for Romero for not walking out on those people, partnered up with him so he could help get him out of his debt. And this was their first film together, but it wasn't until they made Dawn of the Dead, which became a financial success, that they were able to pay back his debts.
I see. So yeah, not a huge box office.
Budget for this? No, I mean I don't know how much it made, but the budget is either 80,000 or 250,000. Those are the two numbers that kept coming up.
Okay,
when looking for it.
Somewhere in between that.
The original cut of the film ran nearly 2 hours and 45 minutes, and as of 2021, this version has never been screened publicly and was considered lost until it was rediscovered through the efforts of Romero scholar Kevin Crease and the Living Dead Museum. But this was supposed to be on the second sight 4K release, this 2 hours and 45-minute cut, but no, they I think there was a struggle with the rights at the last minute, and they had to cut it, unfortunately. But I would love to see that.
Do you think? Because I think this is a 5-star film.
Yeah.
Again, spoiler alert. I think it's a great film. Do you think adding to it would help the film or not?
Depends what they added.
Because it's pretty close to perfect.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In my opinion.
Absolutely. It depends what they added.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we know Romero works very well with length.
Dirty bastard.
You know, Dawn of the Dead is a fucking long film, but it's a perfect film. He knows how to include stuff that matters.
Yeah, I suppose. Yes. I don't think he's renowned for lengthy films.
No,
though.
but he's shown that he can do it though.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It would be an interesting watch. I don't know what they would add to it.
Yeah. He wanted the film to be in black and white as well. But the
Okay.
producers didn't want to risk the experiment. And to be honest, I'm glad they didn't, because then the flashback scenes wouldn't have been as good, because you wouldn't have had that little transition between.
Yeah, because those flashback scenes raise a lot of questions, and I think if the whole thing was black and white, it may not be so obvious.
Yeah.
Or clear cut
Mhm.
the intention.
Yeah. And in 1983, British pop duo Soft Cell released a song titled Martin, inspired by the film.
Nice. I haven't heard it. Have you?
No.
It was a bonus track, wasn't it?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to know Mark Coleman was a fan of it.
Yeah.
Cause I actually think this film is absolutely a queer allegory.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And even more so, I've always thought there's bits there that kind of hint towards it, but when analysing it for the podcast, absolutely. He's absolutely bisexual, and his cousin is just an older bigot relative.
Do you think
that's what I think? That's what I take from it.
I mean, we all sort of
is a little ahead of its time, because considering, you know, the AIDS pandemic would have been like 10 years or so, 5 to 10 years or so later than this, and a film like this you'd expect to see in the 80s during all of that. I mean, look at the allegories in Lost Boys, for example. But I do think this is queer panic with older relatives.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I take from it anyway.
I think that's interesting. I don't necessarily see it, or I didn't necessarily see it as I was watching the film, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Shall we talk about who's in it?
Yes, in a section we like to call "Hey, I Know You."
And Hey, we know them from a lot of Romero films.
We do, yes.
A lot of regulars.
Can you say cheap labor?
Yeah. John
When in doubt,
Amplas.
get your wife to star in it.
Yeah, well, John Amplas stars as Martin.
Yes.
Romero's original script for the film had him as a much older character, who was actually established as a vampire, struggling to live in the modern world. But when he saw his performance in a stage show, he rewrote the character so that he could play him as a younger and more innocent character. And the film actually had an extensive voiceover narration all the way through by Martin, much like the trailer. But it was cut because the narrative was strong enough without the voiceover. But the dialogue is actually in the novelization of the film.
Oh, I see. Now you've said that, I don't necessarily think it would have worked as an older vampire trying to live in the modern world. I think he would have lost a lot of the nuances and the sort of characterization and layers. Maybe it could have become a black comedy.
Yeah, definitely.
In that sense, which would have worked, but
yeah,
I think it's better this way.
John Amplas was star of Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Creepshow, Midnight, The Dark Half, Night Riders, Blood Eaters, No Pets, and more.
Toxic Zombies.
Yeah. Christine Forrest, of course, George Romero's wife. Was he married to her up until when he died?
Yes, yeah, I believe so, yeah.
She plays Christina, and she was star of Monkey Shines, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Creepshow, Two Evil Eyes, Bruiser, Night Riders, Blood Orange, and The Dark Half.
Yeah, and of course it's a case of, get my wife involved and, I don't have to pay her as much because she can be more invested in the profits and such. But I think she does a fantastic job.
She does do a very good job.
I actually do. Considering I don't know if she's a trained actress or not, because she does seem to only appear in his films.
Yeah.
But I think she does a fantastic job.
Yeah. And again, her character definitely added towards my theory of what the film's actually about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Very, very much an ally.
Mm.
Tom Savini is Arthur, and as you know from many, many episodes, he's a star from Dusk Till Dawn, Dawn of the Dead, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Machete, Planet Terror, and earlier in the year on the podcast, The Demolitionist, and more. He also did the stunts and special makeup effects for the film, as you can tell.
Of course.
His face can clearly be seen in the scene where the street person is hit and rolls over the hood and roof of the car.
Yes.
And finally, because a lot of people in this film were in very little.
Some of them only in this film.
I had to dig deep, and I found Roger Kane as Lewis, the star of Deep Throat Part 2, The $50,000 Climax Show, Highway Hookers, Wet Rock, Wild Pussycats, Slippery When Wet, Wet Fantasies, Wet Christmas, Secrets of a Willing Wife, Hard Erections, and more.
So he worked with Disney a lot then?
Yeah. Yes, Roger Kane is in fact a porn star.
Aye.
I would like to point out the name Hard Erections, because,
yeah,
erections are hard.
That's true.
That's almost like the Jess Franco film Nightmares Come at Night.
Nightmares do come at night.
But yeah, Roger Kane. What a performance.
Michael's brother?
No, probably not.
Unlikely.
Without any further ado, let's discuss our feature presentation.
My name is Martin, and I'm 84 years old. People think I'm crazy when I tell them how old I am, or else they think I'm some kind of ghost.
From the director of Night of the Living Dead, Martin, another kind of terror.
I just have a sickness. I just need to drink blood.
So a young man, Martin, traveling on an overnight train from Indianapolis to Pittsburgh, he sedates... Did I say Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh.
You're not pronouncing the H. Pittsburgh.
Okay, Pittsburgh. I don't travel a lot, can you tell? Sedates a woman with a syringe full of narcotics, slices her forearm with a razor blade, then kisses her and drinks her blood, allowing her to slowly bleed to death. And that is all within the first 6 minutes of the film.
It's a very cold opening in both senses.
Yeah, my first time watching this was when you showed me, and I was taken aback by the way it started.
We get absolutely nothing of the characters.
No.
Or really the situation before the first kill.
Yeah.
If you hadn't have done any research, if somebody had just put on a film called Martin, and it's not called Martin the Vampire, it's not called Vampires in any sense of the word or the phrase, you would have been gobsmacked.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is this?
Uh-huh.
You don't get anything. You barely get any dialogue.
Yeah, it's the fact that he strips down as well. Like, he gets naked whilst doing it. It's like, okay, what the fuck is going on here?
Ultimately, Martin, and we'll say it from the start because it's going to keep coming up, is a very downbeat film.
Yeah,
it's not for, people who are not feeling their best.
No.
Because it is a very downbeat, dark film.
Yeah.
Very cold. And spoiler alert, throughout.
Yeah.
There is no happy ending. Pulls no punches from the offset.
Yeah.
It's a slow burn. It is.
Yeah.
But it's a character study.
Yeah.
Really. It is horror, and it has its horror elements. But this is a very shocking opening.
It is. And the film as a whole asks the one big question, and that is Martin a vampire or isn't he a vampire?
Mm-hmm.
Are these flashbacks just his imagination that he has? And is he just a psychopath that likes to go around eating people and killing them?
Yeah. And how much is it the fault of previous generations?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if I took away the fact that he's bisexual and that his older relatives don't approve of it, what did you take away from this?
What I felt the film was about is the I suppose the misunderstanding when it comes to sort of mental illnesses or disorders, and the fact that Martin as a character, you do have a bit of sympathy for him at times, even though he does terrible things. But I feel like a lot of it is the fact that he isn't getting the help, or he's been told so much that he's a certain person that he's almost been created.
Yeah.
And I don't think for a second he's an actual vampire. That there is there's no right or wrongs within it, because George Romero didn't come out and say he is or he isn't. I think the whole point was that he didn't know. He wrote this character. But how I perceive it is that this young man is in no way a vampire, but this young man is highly disturbed, and he's been let down by the people around him.
Yeah.
The first glimpse of black and white that we get is when he enters her room and he sees her in a white dress. Her hair is backcombed in black and white, like she's from a Hammer horror film.
Yeah.
And she sort of reaches out to him as if to beckon him over.
Yeah.
Well, that's far from the truth. What we actually get is an empty room, and she appears from the bathroom in her dressing gown and a face mask on.
Yeah.
Ready for bed. She's not the glamorous victim that he had envisioned. And there is a struggle. It's not, he's not the handsome vampire that lures the woman over and she's mesmerized and hypnotized.
Yeah.
She fights back.
Yeah.
She says the words, "Are you some sort of freak, rapist asshole?"
Yeah.
And I believe he is.
Yeah.
And that's, and the film sort of makes you question that, but ultimately he is. He is a terrible person. Highly uncomfortable, this scene.
Yeah.
Of her fighting back. he tries to comfort her in some weird way by saying, I'm always very careful with the needles. He says that it's important to him.
Yeah.
He's also a very selfish character, and he undresses himself and her as she's being sedated and she's falling asleep, and it embraces her as if they've just had sex.
Yeah.
Now, it is revealed through the film that he does have sex with the sedated women. That isn't shown explicitly on screen, thankfully, but it is alluded to.
Yeah.
So it is a reminder, this guy, he is a murderer, but he's also a rapist as well. And I just think this opening scene is brilliant, because it's a slap around the face. It's like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And because I think budget constraints maybe is in it, but also, wonderful writing and directing, it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
It keeps you, interested, but you are kind of waiting for the next moment where something like this happens and he kills again. And it does happen, and it's just as uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's a very fast-paced editing as well. During certain scenes like this that really help ramp up how intense it can be.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
That first scene where he's cutting her wrist, that's the one that the censors targeted the most. Funny enough, the problem was not what was happening and what we're seeing, but how long it goes on for, rather than, the fact that this is what's happening.
Yeah, and I think part of it, and there's something that's just occurred to me, is that he is a lonely person.
Yeah.
And his victims are lonely people, or who he perceives to be lonely people. He is quite sort of I want to say stealthy, but he sees her as a victim because he notices that she's traveling alone to New York.
Yeah.
And that's why he chooses her as a victim. And there is a process throughout the film where he chooses a victim based on something he's kind of spied from them, and he's sort of eyed them up and followed them, and then took his chance.
Yeah. The next morning, he's met at the Pittsburgh train station by his elderly cousin, Tati Kuda.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure, because they kind of pronounced it
Tati Kuda. Yeah, it sounded like that.
Yeah, Tati. Yeah, I couldn't really figure out how they were pronouncing it, but it's written like not how they were pronouncing it.
He escorts him to a second train destined for Braddock, Pennsylvania, a real city outside of Pittsburgh, where local neighborhoods served as filming locations for the film, as well as many locals serving as extras for the film.
Yeah, and I think it's a very deliberate choice.
Yeah, the cops in the shootout scene were actually policemen.
Yeah. But I think Braddock, Pennsylvania represents something within the film.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that later when it sort of crops up. I say later, I mean within the next 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Because Kuda is dressed in a white suit, and he's very abrupt from the get-go. Got no time for small talk. Strangely, Martin uses the bathroom where a young gentleman is having an open door shit.
Yeah.
Something that does happen again. Apparently no toilet cubicles have doors.
No.
In Braddock, Pennsylvania. This is a really long scene with no dialogue, and we get a sense of eeriness.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah.
From not really knowing what's going on or their relationship. I'm assuming Kuda was written as... Is it Coda? No, it's Kuda.
Kuda.
Idiot. Kuda is written as an older character because Martin was originally meant to be an older character.
Yeah.
But the whole cousin thing, I mean, there's a huge gap in age there.
Yeah.
If Christina was his cousin, it would make more sense because they're closer in age, but there's a huge age gap there. We kind of question, what does Kuda know? Why is he so cold? Does he know what we know? And we also, as they're traveling, get a sense of the area of Braddock, Pennsylvania. So Braddock lost its importance with the collapse of the steel industry in the United States in the 1970s and into the 1980s. So it had a population in the 20s of, in the tens of thousands, but then sort of over the decades, I think up until sort of 2000, it slipped down to just under 2,000 people.
Yeah.
It's one of those where the collapse of the steel industry very much affected the town. And you see that throughout the film. There's places that are left derelict. People are out of work. They're just hanging around. There's a clear sort of poor rich divide as well, I noticed. People up on a hill seem to be richer than the people who are down at the bottom of the hill within Braddock. And I think that's a huge part of the film. I feel like the city is, not to sound like a cliche, but is an extra character in the film.
Yeah, I think so. Cuda, in accordance with family tradition, has reluctantly agreed to give Martin room and board alongside Cuda's orphaned granddaughter, Christina. Martin claims to be much older than his twink appearance would suggest. He, in fact, claims that he's 84.
He does. And he kind of believes it.
Yeah.
Too. He does kind of believe it. And only really him and Cuda actually believe that to be true.
Yeah.
But he also goes throughout the film saying he's not magical.
Yeah.
It's not magic.
Yeah. It's like he's in denial. Like he doesn't know what he is. Which again, for both our allegories, definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
He, as we mentioned, he has romantic monochrome visions of religious icons, vampiric seductions, and torch-carrying mobs. But whether these are memories or fantasies is not specified. And we get the first one on the train, and the second time when Cuda, who is a Lithuanian Catholic, who treats Martin like an old world vampire, starts referring to him as Nosferatu, which happens a lot throughout the film.
Is that because they're not allowed to say Dracula?
I don't know. I'm not sure, because, if you're allowed to say Nosferatu, there's a good chance you're allowed to say Dracula.
But Nosferatu in itself was, not, I assume, not copyrighted?
Maybe.
Is it now? Because they were sued by Bram Stoker.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, he says this he'll just pop up out of nowhere. Like, Nosferatu.
He will. He says, first I will save you, then I will destroy you.
Yeah. Cuda warns him to stay away from the locals and not to communicate with Christina or he'll kill him.
Yeah. I've told her not to speak to you, but she will. You will not answer her.
Cuda tries unsuccessfully to repel Martin with traditional methods such as strings of garlic and a crucifix, which Martin mocks and tells him there's no real magic.
Yeah, Cuda also tells him that he must work at his shop.
Yeah.
Much to Mrs. Bellini's shock. Mrs. Bellini, I'm assuming it's Karen Bellini, says, a young man in the house with Christina, related or not, I don't think it's right. Cuda says, but Mrs. Bellini, I can't do, I'm not doing a Lithuanian accent, I'm sorry. Mrs. Bellini says, you shouldn't have it, Cuda. How will it look? And Cuda says, it looks as you want it to look, Mrs. Bellini. My family knows how to behave. The one who doesn't know how to behave is you, Cuda.
Yeah.
And I think it's another theme that's prominent. Wow, we're struggling with our words today, aren't we? Prominent is the hypocrisy of older generations. And I really feel that. I feel like Cuda is really the main antagonist of the film. Martin is an antagonist too. He's a conflicted character. But I think Cuda is the main antagonist of the film.
Definitely.
He's, shows no support. He's very much stuck in the past, stuck in his ways, and it's the way he interacts with Martin, but also the other characters,
Yeah.
where that is very clear. And it's that kind of behavior that in many ways has left Braddock the way it has.
Yeah.
Braddock, the town, and is why so many younger generations are leaving the town.
Yeah.
Because of that old mindset.
Yeah. Plus, let's be real here. If we didn't see Martin going around killing people and sucking their blood and whatnot, then I still think he would be the exact same way with him. Like, if Martin wasn't actually going around doing these things, Kuda would still believe it and would still be that exact way.
Well, as far as Kuda is aware, he believes that he has up until
but he has
that
no
point,
evidence.
But he has no evidence.
Yeah.
And, spoiler alert, later on in the film, he still has no evidence, but believe he has.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting one, and it is throughout the whole film. It is a weird sort of mixture of morals.
Yeah.
Where as a viewer, you're sat there and you're like, well, I'm sympathizing with Martin.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, I can empathize with him. Because, in the case of the queer community, we've been ostracized like that at times as a community. And so we can empathize with that. But ultimately, we realize, well, okay, this is some, asshole rapist freak.
Yeah.
It is, and so how far can our sympathies go?
Yeah.
And that makes it an interesting film, but also makes it the relentlessly bleak film that it is.
Yeah. Kuda points out that Martin is like a weirdo at the dinner table. So Martin decides to mess around with a finger trap to impress Christina. And when he's in his room later that day, Christina and her boyfriend Arthur, played by Tom Savini, begin to have an argument. So he opens his bedroom door to find out what's going on, but instead he's greeted with Kuda calling him Nosferatu again and fitting a bell at the top of his door.
He's trying to get the tea on Arthur and Christina's relationship. It is a very volatile relationship.
Yeah.
And Christina's really lovely. She does talk to Martin. Martin does struggle to communicate with her. And for me, the question is he struggling to communicate with women? Or does he just struggle to communicate?
Yeah.
And it's a difficult one because I don't, he speaks a lot throughout the film of struggling to interact in terms of sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
But seemingly he does struggle to interact with women full stop.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. Christina's also fuming because she's not allowed a telephone.
Yeah.
Now, by 1976, 77, a telephone in the house is very common, even for older generations. And so Kuda's not only just old-fashioned, he's really fucking old-fashioned.
Yeah.
We're talking 100 years old-fashioned. That he wouldn't allow a telephone in the house. And we realize throughout the film that the way that he and his ancestors and his family have affected Martin, but also the way that it's affected Christina.
Yeah.
And the negative effect it's had on Christina, who by all accounts is a perfectly pleasant, grounded young woman.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have the sort of, mental illness that Martin does, or we could believe does, because of the whole vampire thing.
Yeah. And in this next scene, we see that she's highly skeptical and critical of Kuda's beliefs when he tries to tell her all about Martin being a vampire. She thinks he should receive some psychiatric treatment when he tells her that he's 84, and goes on a big rant about the way the family's treated him, showing that she is indeed a true ally.
Yes. And I think Martin kind of, he doesn't actually say anything against getting psychiatric help.
No.
Like, part of him realizes that he probably should.
Yeah.
But he kind of excuses it. He says, "Oh, no, it wouldn't work for me." Rather than, so it doesn't say, "No, I don't need it."
Mhm.
It's just, "Oh, it wouldn't work for me."
Yeah.
So there's no point. So it's that sort of duality of his character
Mhm.
where he believes that he's 84 years old,
Yeah.
but doesn't believe he's a vampire in the traditional sense. Whereas he believes that he needs psychiatric help, but doesn't believe it would work for him. So, and
Yeah.
I feel like part of a massive spoiler. I'm sorry, but I believe that he does travel there because no one forced him to travel there.
Mhm.
No one, handcuffed him and kidnapped him. I think part of the reason why he went there is because he was ready to die
Yeah.
and he didn't see a way out.
Mhm.
And it was maybe hopeful, but couldn't see a way out. And
Yeah.
eventually it happened.
Martin seeks advice from a local radio disc jockey. A what? Like a horse jockey,
Like an apprentice jockey.
an apprentice jockey, who dubs him the Count. Yes, we're saying the Count and nothing that sounds similar. He rejects many common
I'm
perceptions.
still thinking Dracula is they weren't allowed to say
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
He rejects many common perceptions about vampires, saying there is no magic stuff. The DJ's listeners consider Martin to be a hit. Whilst making deliveries for Cuda's butcher shop, Martin meets a lonely, depressed housewife named Abby Santini. When she touches Martin during an attempt at seducing him, he flees.
Yeah, so initially she trauma dumps on him.
Yeah.
She lives at the top of the hill
Mm-hmm.
and she feels sorry for him because he's traveled all that way for what is essentially a piece of meat, and she drives anyway. So she drives him back into town. She trauma dumps about her unhappy relationship with her husband, and she's having a tough time, and he doesn't speak at all. Martin doesn't until the very end, where he thanks her, and she asks him if he's available for handiwork.
Yeah.
DIY around the house. I think she's an interesting character because she's a lonely character, and he doesn't kill her.
No.
But he still feels drawn to her.
Yeah.
Because they are both very lonely people who aren't getting the support that they need.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. We don't see too much of her during the film, but I think their relationship is an interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Especially with how her story ends as well.
Yes.
Unbeknownst to his family, Martin goes to Pittsburgh and targets a woman he sees at a grocery store. Believing her to be alone whilst her husband is away on business, he breaks into her house but finds her in bed with her lover, which is Lewis. But unfortunately, grocery store woman doesn't get a name.
She doesn't. No, I think she's just called housewife victim.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm not a fan of. But I suppose Lewis only gets a name because she has to shout his name.
That's true. That's true.
So she had to have something to shout.
And because he's played by a porn star.
Yeah, of course.
This sequence is like nail-biting intense. It's so creepy and just really grubby and horrible. But there's an odd bit of camp in there as well.
I don't know if age has given it camp.
Yeah, like Martin just bouncing off the bed and drugging Lewis with a syringe.
Yeah.
And then running away, and then just running around the house. It's kind of camp, but kind of unsettling in the same way, which is something that Romero is very good at doing. And this is probably the best example of it.
I think maybe the fact that this is the most 70s house that has ever existed makes it camp. But also the Lewis and the woman shouting at each other and getting muddled and mixed up, and it's a very messy affair. Again, it's not, the Count Dracula seducing
Yeah.
the lady, and that ruins it for Martin.
Yeah.
Because Martin does, but burst in on them, and Lewis, he's nervous of the affair being found out, and the woman is shocked because she quickly explains that she has no idea who the fuck Martin is, and that this is an invader. And I think that's almost played for laughs. That moment. He again says, "I'm not going to hurt you," because of him.
Yeah.
So he says to her, "I'm not going to hurt you because of Lewis being here." And he says to Lewis, "You weren't supposed to be here." And I feel like Martin in some way sees the women that he targets as belonging to him. And the fact that Lewis was there means that she is in some way impure.
Yeah.
Or not fully his. Because he had that sort of hallucination at the beginning with the train victim of her reaching out to him.
Yeah.
And that's not the case in either of these scenes.
No. I mean, this just kind of added to my interpretation of the film, the fact that he decided to go for the man instead of the woman.
Yeah, but I think for me, it's because she's seen as impure now. She doesn't belong to Martin.
Yeah.
And he kind of... I thought with Lewis, he kills Lewis without the intention of drinking his blood, because he stabs him with a large stick into the neck. And his face moves. It's pretty gnarly. I mean, it hasn't aged the best. The effects haven't aged the best, but it's a pretty gnarly scene.
Yeah.
And then, he takes his shirt off and drinks his blood. But I think that's because his sort of insatiable desire for blood. That's how I interpreted it. But, he could be a bisexual character in that sense, but doesn't fully commit to the bisexuality.
Yeah. Well, he kills and feeds on him, and then drugs the woman before leaving the scene and talking to the radio DJ about people being difficult and how he's always been too shy to do, in his exact words, the sexy stuff.
Yes.
At least with anyone who's conscious anyway.
Yeah. And that's when the film tells us, oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a really bad guy.
Yeah.
Not that we didn't know beforehand the fact that he murdered complete strangers, but this is okay.
Yeah.
Why are we on Martin's side? Are we not on Martin's side?
Yeah. Back in Braddock, Father Howard, played by Romero himself, has dinner with Cuda, Martin and Christina. Cuda tells him how older people need a priest who thinks in the old ways before he starts asking him about his belief in demons. To which Cuda recommends Father Zulemas, should I say, an older priest who claims to have fought demons. He said he went to see that film, The Exorcist. He said they did it all wrong. I don't suppose you've seen that movie. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
There's Romero popping in his review of The Exorcist.
And I thought it was actually quite funny at the beginning where Cuda was like, "Oh, you were sent here or you asked to come?" And Father Howard says, "I was sent by the diocese when Father Corelli retired." And Cuda, being a twat, says, "Retired? Huh. Father Corelli is younger than I am. He asked to leave. He left like the rest of them. He thinks this town is finished." To which Father Howard replies, "No, he has cancer. He's very near the end. In fact, I haven't heard. He may be gone." Cuda is mildly embarrassed.
Yeah.
But I think that again shows the pig-headedness of the older generation and of Cuda in particular.
Yeah.
The judgment, the judgmental side of him without knowing the facts.
Yeah.
And we're like, "Oh, you think you've got it bad? We've had it. I'm still working. I'm still going. I'm 70, 80, 1059, and I'm still going. Yeah, you don't know what hard work is. And I think that's, for me, what I took from particularly the character of Cuda and from the film.
Yeah, no, definitely. He brings Zulemas to the house and he attempts to perform an exorcism on Martin. Martin gets his revenge for this by playing a prank on Cuda and jumping out on him in a foggy playground with a cape, white face paint, and fake fangs.
I love how Romero made this look like an old-fashioned Universal Monsters scene. I love that because in the back of your mind you're like, oh shit, maybe he is.
Yeah.
And then you realize, no, you dumbass. This is, he doesn't look like that.
I think it's the amount of fog that we get in the playground that really adds to it.
And then we get I don't know what it's called, where it becomes like a circle. What's it called?
Fisheye.
Is it fish? But it's not fisheye because it doesn't go weird. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a looking through a telescope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Martin...
I better go back to film school.
Martin goes to see Mrs. Santini again. He says, "You want me here for sex, don't you? I've never really done it before, but I've decided I'd really like to do it with you." Lucky girl. Martin has sex with Mrs. Santini, and they begin a full-fledged affair, which lessens his appetite for blood.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that his thirst for blood lessens when he gets sex.
Yeah.
When he has sex.
Yeah.
With someone. And so it's kind of like, well, is the blood a what's the word I'm looking for? A replacement for sex in his life, which is incredibly creepy.
Yeah.
When you really think about it, like, oh my god, ew. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely interesting that that sort of coincides with when he first has sex. I mean, it could just be her with her similarities to him, finding someone who's like him, like, 'cause she's clearly depressed and having a terrible time in life. Maybe that is, because I mean, with what happens to her as well, I don't know.
Like a kindred spirit.
Yeah.
Someone, we're assuming that Martin's a very lonely person.
Yeah.
Very difficult. Difficult for him to communicate.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what his parents were like, but from what Cuda has said, his mother believed in the vampire folklore and the family curse. So I'm assuming that his mother wasn't great either. And so he's somebody who has been, left or, kind of left to be lonely and can't really function in relationships, and he's found a kindred spirit, somebody who is also lonely, sad, and they've come together and it's made him, I don't know, happier in a sense. And so his replacement for that, which was blood, isn't necessary anymore.
Yeah. Christina, on the other hand, is becoming increasingly frustrated and fuming by her disagreements with Cuda, ultimately moving out of his house and bidding Martin goodbye. She tells Cuda about himself before she leaves, shouting at him about the insanity in their family, and he is disgusted with her language, to which she says, "Language? Shit on the language." And then she says, "I'm leaving with Arthur tomorrow, but don't worry about us having any offspring. I won't even stay with Arthur. Arthur's just my way out."
Yeah.
I love a girl boss.
Yes. And this is Christina's story, is her wanting to get their hell out of Cuda's home.
Yeah.
But also out of the town.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing in the town for her. She's a young woman who wants to see the bright lights and wants to know that there's a future for her no matter what she chooses. And that's not available to her in whatever the place... What's the place called? Remind me.
Braddock.
excuse me. And that's not available to her in Braddock.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't love Arthur, and Arthur probably doesn't love her, but it's a relationship of convenience because, you know, he probably needed someone to cook and look after him, and she needed a gateway out of Braddock.
Yeah.
You know, the straw that breaks the camel's back essentially is when Arthur stands her up to go to the bar for a drink with Cuda.
Mm-hmm.
Cuda tells him that he may not want to have children with Christina given the family curse.
Yeah.
Arthur then recounts that to Christina, who is fuming at Cuda sticking his nose in, particularly with something that she believes isn't even true.
Yeah.
Now, I think that this family curse, because it is something that has sort of genetic links, I think this family curse is a mental illness.
Yeah.
And because the mental illness paired with this crazy old generation telling them that the curse is vampirism has created this folklore and this vampiric family curse, and someone like Martin is a victim of this. That's how I perceive it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Worried about experiencing withdrawal, Martin goes on a feeding binge in the city, where he attacks a pair of homeless men and narrowly escapes the police.
Yeah, he lets Mrs. Bellini off, despite her berating him at the store for being lazy. She essentially says, "Oh, Martin, you're lazy. People around here work hard." And it's just ironic given how the place, Braddock is, and how no one is allowed to work hard in Braddock because the industry has, died.
Yeah.
And so someone like Arthur, who is dying to work, someone in the younger generation like Arthur, really is desperate to work, has to leave Braddock because there isn't enough work for him to work hard. I think it's quite ironic. And again, that pig-headedness of the older generation, that hypocrisy, the fact that they don't see beyond their own four walls and see how things truly are for the younger generation, and instead of helping, she's berating them for that.
Upon returning to Braddock, Martin visits Mrs. Santini, only to discover that she has committed suicide by cutting her wrists in a bathtub. Cuda, who has learned of this, believes Martin to be her killer and fatally stakes him through the heart before burying him in a backyard flower bed.
Well, talk about a hard-hitting ending.
Yeah, because after this...
Completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, we get radio callers inquiring and speculating about the count, whilst the end credits are rolling, whilst Cuda places a small crucifix atop Martin's grave.
So he's buried him in the garden.
Yeah, and that's the end of the film.
And that's the end of the film.
Yeah.
Really cold, downbeat ending.
Yeah.
I mean, it matches the beginning and the middle.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a black comedy sandwiched in between. I think with Mrs. Santini, she wasn't enough. He wasn't enough for her. They both were very sad people who kind of were reliant on each other to stop themselves.
Yeah.
And it ultimately wasn't enough. Martin ended up having to drink blood. And Mrs. Santini couldn't face it anymore in her depression and killed herself.
Yeah.
Because the help, they weren't actually being helped by each other.
No. And
I thought that was really interesting. Very sad, obviously. And then to go from that to, there's a scene where Martin's walking through a parade, and then boom, he wakes up and there's a stake for his chest. Yeah. At the end. And I think that's so wonderful. I I would hope that the longer cut would still have this as the ending, because it's a really shocking ending.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful ending, I felt, and it's what really stuck with me after watching it. Um, it's sad, but also brings up a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately I question whether Martin knew that this was his end.
Yeah.
And he kind of wanted it to be that way because he had spoken to the radio presenter, and at times he'd said, part of him hoped somebody would catch up with him
Mm-hmm.
and kill him because, he's lived for so long and he's tired, or he knows that what he's doing is bad and that he needs to ultimately be punished for it.
Yeah.
It, raises the question of what's going to happen to Kuda because everyone in his life has left him.
Mm-hmm.
He's alone. But he also seems happy with that at the end.
Yeah.
Strangely
But I mean,
enough.
this is also that, the idea that, yes, a villain was killed.
Yeah. He was a villain.
By killing him, no one else is going to get eaten or sexually assaulted. But at the end of the day, he's also killed by someone who's willing to kill someone just from hearsay.
Yes.
Just someone who's just no concrete evidence to say that this guy was ever a vampire or killing anyone.
Uh-huh.
What's to say in he's still out there, and if he has suspicions about anyone else, he's just going to go do the same thing.
And that's the thing with Kuda, is that instead of helping Martin, he ultimately punishes him.
Mm-hmm.
And it begs the question is if he had had more help before the film had started and throughout the film, could it all have been prevented?
Mm-hmm.
And he could have gotten the help he needs and the correct punishment for his crimes.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. Again, it's a lot of very sort of sad, dark questions we're asking here. But I think films don't have to have happy endings. They don't have to come to a clear conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
These are the kind of films that stick with you. The films with the layers, with the interesting characters, with the interesting morals, particularly in horror films. And I just think it's fantastic. I really do. I think it's wonderful.
No, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. It's definitely one of those films that I would urge all horror fans to watch, because if you haven't seen it, you're missing out on a classic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And let's get to the awards. Biggest queen is obviously got to be Christina.
It's Christina. Yeah, we like, she's a strong woman who knew what she wanted.
Yeah.
She tried to help Martin, but did he want to receive that help from her?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Biggest gasp? It's a big long gasp because I've got that entire opening sequence on the train.
Yes, I agree, but the ending.
Yeah.
For me, yeah.
Best dialogue? I've got language. Shit on the language.
I went with, are you some sort of freak, rapist, asshole? Because ultimately, that's the question for the whole film.
Yeah.
And, whatever side of the fence you are, I think he is some sort of freak, rapist, asshole.
And that's camp. I've got Martin playing a vampire prank on Kuda in a foggy playground.
George Romero as a priest talking about how much he enjoyed The Exorcist.
Yes.
It was hard. It was very, very difficult to find camp in this film.
For ratings, I give it 10 ambiguous twink vampires out of 10.
I gave it 10 times Mrs. Bellini should have minded her own business out of 10.
And masterpiece, trash or basic, I think it's a masterpiece.
I think it's a masterpiece.
And if you want to check it out yourself, it's available on Blu-ray, 4K, and video on demand. The 4K transfer is amazing. And if you enjoy this, I recommend checking out Let the Right One In, another vampire drama, but a modern day one, and with LGBTQ plus allegories in there.
Yes. I suggest if you enjoyed this, check out Maniac.
And of course, as we realised at the start of this episode, if you enjoyed this, also check out Bones and All.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
If you're a fan of Martin, let us know on social media. We're Horror Cult Trash over on Facebook and Instagram, Horror Cult Trash on Twitter. I'm Gaz92 on Letterboxd, Gazmo205 on Instagram, and now Threads.
Ooh.
GazCruise92 on Twitter. Did I say that already? Yeah, whatever. You know where to find me. But yeah, we're also on Threads as well.
Yes.
Horror Cult Trash Ever.
Yeah, and I'm Chris Barker 823 on Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd.
Give us a rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, like and follow on everything else, a rating on Spotify. Next week, we are back with some camp, some trash, some fun.
Yes, thank God.
We will be discussing the Prom Night sequels.
Hello, Mary Lou.
Yes, part 2. The Last Kiss and Deliver Us from Evil. So we'll be back, same time, same place next week.
Bye.